The plan was not for this to be a part 2, but everything happens for a reason. Main thing is this video is a writing exercise for me. This whole project is a writing exercise for me. It will make the most sense if you watch part 1, but you, I think, could still enjoy part 2. You know, sometimes you just pick up a book in the middle of a series and then you go back to the beginning after. I'm going to give an abridged version of the intro that I gave in that first video. Here we go. This is a restructure of Tamara Pierce's Immortals series, turning the quartet into a trilogy. I did not feel like the 4th book fit with the rest of the series, and I felt that the romantic elements of the series were not as consistent as they could have been. And that's kind of an intro. Okay. Hello? Thank you for checking this out. I'm not going to go over everything that I talked about in the first video. I felt the 4th book didn't fit in with the first 3 books of the series. There are chaos elements with a capital C. There's a greater cosmic battle between the gods and the goddess of chaos, but it's only in the 4th book, and there's no evidence of it in the first 3 books, so this restructure is kind of spreading that out more and fitting some of the action from that 4th book into the 3rd book, Emperor Mage. And then the romance in it, it's an age gap, student-teacher romance. It left a lot of readers with conflicted feelings about a series that they otherwise loved. So for this restructure, those romance elements are also being sort of redistributed over the 2nd and 3rd book out of only the 4th book. Spoiler warnings, gotta say that one too, for the Immortals series, for Tamara Pierce's writing, for the Tortollan-based series. I will probably be referring to some of the others, particularly Song of the Lioness and Tempest and Slaughter. One thing I will say again here is that if you love the Immortals series and because of the age gap romance aren't totally comfortable sharing it with a younger generation, there are 4 points that I've come up with that you can sort of mentally change the canon to just slightly modify the story. One is aging up Daine. People kind of already do that. Adding 2 or 3 or 4 years won't break the story. Number 2, Numair is a liar. He was 24 when he met Daine. Number 3, instead of magelet, cross that off, she's wild mage. Anytime Numair calls her magelet, no, he called her wild mage. It's more respectful or affectionate or tender, much better than magelet. And number 4, Daine is called the girl way too much, especially in the 3rd and 4th book where she's supposed to be getting into this romance with somebody who is older than her. So anywhere that it says the girl, particularly in the 3rd and 4th book, just it's Daine or she. That simple. Those 4 things make a difference in making Numair less creepy, particularly calling her wild mage instead of magelet. And then I think the last main point that I want to carry over from my original introduction, this is not a rewrite, this is not a fan fiction. Tamara Pierce's writing is solid on its own. I just think that this series is stronger as a trilogy than a quartet, and I think the chaos elements and the romantic elements need to be more consistent throughout. So here we go. As I said, not recapping any of the plot stuff that I did in the first video. You can make the choice if you watch part 1 after this, or if you pause this, watch part 1, and come back here. We are picking up in Wolfspeaker at the end of chapter 3. Numair left Daine in the valley in Dunlap. He is trying to get a message to King John. She needs to stay with the wolf pack because the wolves' brain structures are literally changing due to exposure to her magic, so she wants to help them through that. In this moment, Daine's yearning for Numair is starting to take root. Chapter 4. So Daine, Kitten, Cloud, and now also the Dark King return to the Cave of the Wolves. They settle in for the night while Daine explains what happened at the castle and why she wasn't able to convince the humans to stop destroying the forest. Brokefang, the pack leader, tells her that they didn't really expect the humans to listen and they have begun their own plan. This has started with the stealing of axes and saws so the humans can't cut down the trees. Daine is afraid that they will send the Huntmaster after the wolves, and this fear doesn't get better when the wolves tell her that they have a plan for him, Tate, as well. In the original, in this chapter at this point, Daine has a mute dream of her mother and her father, Weirin, at home and happy. With this restructure, this will be a true dream or an interactive dream instead, and it will be enabled because of a very precise combination of reasons. Number 1, they are in the heart of Weirin's power in the mortal realm. Number 2, it is, or it nearly is, the autumn equinox, and this is already a time for crossing between the realms. Number 3, the mortal mage barrier between the divine realm and the mortal realms is at its most degraded and its thinnest here due to the actions of Tristan and Ozorn with the Immortals. Although Daine is mortal and Sarah is bound to Weirin's land for the next 100 years, and this is something that they can mention in the conversation, there is Old White, the first male god of the wolves, and he can sort of put his paw in here to assist a brief passage for Daine in her dreams here. As true as the dream is, it is a time that will end soon, and Sarah may include the joke that at least it's better than you dying too soon again. For this restructure, we can splice in the way that Daine sees her ma from the end of chapter 1 of Realms of the Gods, and it can be the same way that she sees her now. A little bit of her can hope that this is real and that the last 2 years from Ma's death were the dream. But Sarah confirms she did die. Daine doesn't have to linger on it from there. They are able to touch in this dream verse, unlike in the death versions, but all of Daine's senses and the sensations are a little bit muted, so warmth and softness a little bit absent. They can still embrace, and Daine can flash back to her mother's cold body in her arms as she does in the Realms of the Gods. Somewhere in this visit, Sarah performs magic that's a new power for her, and it startles Daine. There isn't fog here, like when Daine briefly dies and her spirit comes to this cottage, but outside of the cottage, the sky is illuminated by different colors and points of light that Sarah identifies as the battle between the great gods holding back Usoe and her servants of chaos. However you pronounce that. This dream gives Sarah an opportunity to say that she's sorry sooner. Sarah is dismissive of the importance of the mortal conflicts going on, and she's ready to scold Daine for involving herself in warrior business when she's no warrior, but Daine retorts that Sarah's murder taught her a woman needs to be able to protect herself, whatever that fight looks like. Somewhere in the dream, there can either be a brief interruption for Sarah from one of her mortal petitioners, or else Daine can just ask and Sarah can explain that what she is now is a midwife and gardens goddess for the area where she and Daine used to live. Weirin is away, potentially doing his work in the mortal realms, but his return signals Daine's time to depart. This brief encounter can confirm anything left that Daine needs to see or know about her Da. She may give the same shy greeting as in Realms of the Gods, and he is terse and even more awkward than she is. In later conversation with Brokefang can include a confirmation that Old White almost certainly guided Daine on her path to Sarah for this dream. Daine wakes up and the adult wolves leave to go hunt, and they leave one adult wolf with Daine and Kitten to guard the pups. Throughout the book this far, Daine has practiced the mind melding with a few of the wolves, each time tiring her out enough that she needs to sleep. When the hunting wolves return, she mind melds with Brokefang for a second time, and she explores how much he's been accidentally changed by her magic, and this brings her guilt and grief. The night is restless for everyone because something magical is occurring in the area. Morning again, all of the adult wolves hunt again, leaving only Daine to guard the pups. She finds a squirrel who's been wounded by a stormwing and settles in to heal him. Just as she finishes with him, Kitten starts shrieking an alarm that Daine has never heard from the dragon. A cold fang has been released to hunt down the thief of the logger's axes and saws. A cold fang is a reptilian immortal creature in toxic shades of green and gold. I imagine it is built similarly to a Komodo dragon. It moves slowly on fours, but it's able to move quickly reared up on its hind legs to attack. Its tail ends in a buzzing rattle that evokes a rattlesnake, and its presence causes a freezing frost in its immediate proximity. It has silver claws and silver fangs that drip poison. Its gaze paralyzes those trapped in it, and its scaled hide cannot be pierced by wolf fangs. For the sake of reminding us it exists, the Darking may join the fight here. It's fast, small, and unlikely to get hurt by the cold fang. Its most useful attack would be something like attempting to wrap around its eyes. Then another immortal comes along and rescues them all. This immortal is a basilisk, a different reptilian immortal, who predominantly walks on his rear legs while carrying his long tail draped over a forelimb, but he has the ability to travel at great speed on all four limbs. He is taller than Numair, over 6.5 feet, with a beaded hide, the pearly dark gray of a thunderhead with paler gray belly scales. His teeth are not described, but I believe they are a flat grinding type of teeth because the only thing he eats are rocks. And one of his abilities is a song that turns enemies to stones. He uses such a song to stop the cold fang and taste the rock, then declares it too raw to eat for at least a decade. This basilisk names himself T'Ka for Daine. He's very intrigued by her connection with the wolves and with the fact that she has a baby dragon. Basilisks are cousins to dragons, and they are very traveled scholars and gossips. T'Ka has the ability to communicate with Kitten, which Daine cannot do with her telepathic magic, and Kitten in return cannot talk with verbal speech. T'Ka snuck through one of the portals of his own accord. He is curious why the Cold Fang was hunting them. When the adult wolves return and they meet T'Ka, they explain the theft of the tools. T'Ka thinks this was at Daine's direction and is even more fascinated when the wolves defend Daine and explain that it was their own plan. T'Ka decides to help this funny group of mortals and turns all the tools to stone so they can never be used even if they are found. For the restructure, T'Ka is the best venue for relaying any bit of information about the Dragonlands, dragon lore, young dragons compared to Kitten. He could name her family members. It may be that he sat in on a great conference once when he was young. Giving this information can serve for character and world building. It's useful, it's interesting, and it's the only way probably to see anything about the Dragonlands since we're cutting that visit without Realms of the Gods. Early on, T'Ka could ask Daine why a demigoddess is interacting so freely in the mortal realm, and her blunt response of, "I'm just a human," he can answer along the lines of, "I see." He might identify that the Darking is divine realm and blood in origin, but there's nothing else that he knows about it, and over the course of the story, this one can learn clear speaking from T'Ka. Basilisks are renowned linguists, apparently, and while discussing things with T'Ka, the absence of Numair crosses Daine's thoughts to bring a fresh tinge of longing. The wolves agree with Daine to move to another cave away from this area since they were found by the Cold Fang, and T'Ka accompanies them. In the original version, Daine doesn't meet Rikosh the Stormwing until the next chapter. For this restructure, we're going to bring him up to here. Stormwings on the patrol for Numair and Daine see the wolves and ignore them, while Daine hides with Cloud and Kitten. Cloud being Daine's pony, they're her only remaining family member after her farm was attacked by bandits and burned. The Stormwings do not ignore T'Ka though, and they drop down to ask if he's seen the human pair and to warn him that they are killers of Immortals. T'Ka is dismissive and neutral. For this version, instead of only a rude brown-haired male Stormwing talking to T'Ka, Rikosh addresses him first. Neutral and polite, immortal to immortal with no quarrel. He can accept T'Ka being dismissive and neutral and return to higher air, with the brown-haired Stormwing throwing the same barbs as he does originally, earning a threat from T'Ka. While they're talking, Cloud bites Daine's arm to stop her from shooting the Stormwings, who are doing nothing to harm anyone there. They've all started to notice magic in the air overhead, but they haven't figured out yet what magic has been worked over the area. Daine is frustrated when the wolves go off the trail, but almost immediately learns it's because Mora has run away from the castle to the forest and is now surrounded by a pack of wolves. Mora is the younger sister of the Lady of Dunlath Castle. Dunlath is the center of the plot of this book. A stubborn conversation follows. Mora will not go home and will not tell Daine why she has left. Daine doesn't really want to care why she left. She definitely needs her to just go home before something that would actually hurt her happens, despite Mora's fear the wolves will not. Before they are done, a starling runs into a barrier and dies. The same barrier had already stopped Mora from getting out of the valley. Mora screams when she sees T'Ka, but she is a little more polite after being startled. He is able to pass through the barrier. This mortal magic isn't stopping him. As Daine realizes the danger of the barrier around the valley, she stops to magically, telepathically relay a warning to all animals in the area on both sides of the barrier. After that, they finally reach new caves for the wolves to den in. Daine tries to get more information out of Mora while they prepare dinner. There are bats who live in the cave, and Daine makes friends with them while Mora has more animal anxieties to get over. Later, when all the wolves are hunting, including the puppies, Daine practices the mind melding with one of the bats in order to go out with them to map the magical barrier around the valley with echolocation. Toward the end of the chapter, as Daine returns to her own mind and body, she discovers her ears have changed shape, and this unsettles her. Given how hard she worked to build the sense of self that allows her human essence to exist separately from her wild magic, this transformation that she is not expecting is even more alarming, and Numair isn't there now to recast the separation barrier spell. Chapter 6, when Daine wakes up, she's back to normal. Mora is hungry, but still unwilling to answer Daine's questions. Taka startles Daine by revealing that he can speak with vocal cords, where up till now, he communicated with her via her magical telepathy. Shortly after that, a clanging bell sound bangs over the Shortly after, a clanging bell sound bangs over the valley, stressing everyone's ears. Daine pops into the mind of a marmot on the other side of the barrier and discovers it's Numair, throwing raw power at the barrier to try and break it. Taka is able to cross over to ask him to stop. While he's taking care of that, Daine senses Stormwings arriving and loads her crossbow to fight. Mora, surprisingly, is arguing with them, and we see Rikosh for the second time in this restructure. Mora almost gets herself killed by grabbing the crossbow right before Daine would have fired it, terrifying Daine. The only thing I would modify from this first interaction between Rikosh and Daine is, instead of at the end threatening to kill Daine if he catches her alone, he can threaten Daine that she had better keep Mora safe. Stormwings have a very difficult time with having children, so they tend to be affectionate toward the offspring of other species, especially those that are abandoned or neglected like Mora. Rikosh wants to take her home, and Daine is entertained that Mora's stubbornness is just as thwarting to him. After the Stormwings leave, Daine goes to write a message to Numair about the information she's gathered since they've been separated. Mora finally gives to Daine the information that she overheard between Lord Belden, Lady Yolaine, her sister, and Tristan, the war mage who's working for Ozorn but seems to be having an affair with Yolaine. Mora tells Daine about their planned rebellion against Jonathan. Daine writes this down since she's not going to be able to talk to Numair. Meeting up with Taka again, he thanks her for his life becoming so entertaining since he came through the barrier, and he takes her note to Numair. Daine hops back over to the marmot to see Numair, and a romance-enhanced restructure can give Numair a little shine when Daine looks at him, surprised how fiercely she's missed his reassuring presence. When they parted at the end of chapter 3, Numair, somewhat joking, threatens to lock Daine in a dark dungeon if she doesn't keep herself safe while they're separated. That's in the original. Now, he can't get back into the valley, and there are King's Own and soldiers on the way. He needs to ask Daine to do something dangerous, going to the forts at the north and south ends of the valley to try and count how many soldiers are present in Dunlath. When she agrees and he wants to impress upon her to be safe, he jokingly threatens to drop her off a glacier into a deep crevice instead of a dungeon, which Daine answers by showing him the marmot's butt. When Daine returns to her body and mind, she significantly changed to the shape of a marmot, which Mora and Taka see. In the original, this relieves Daine of her concern that she is losing her mind. Perhaps for this, the uncomplicated way that she's able to transition her face back to normal, and Mora expecting that she is just normal human Daine, irrespective of the shape change. This settles Daine a little better with her senses of humanness and control. After this, when Daine goes hunting, instead of remembering a conversation with Callie from some other time, this same conversation can be had with Mora here about how Daine closes out her magical senses so that she's only hunting by tracking and normal means. Right here, there's also a part where Daine calls Numair Master Numair, which is something that she never does anywhere else in any of the books. It might be because Mora has been calling him Master Numair, but Daine has never done that, and she doesn't need to do that this one time here now. When Daine returns from hunting and Taka is eating rocks while they are eating dinner, he singles out some of them for dessert. Daine asks him what they are. He identifies them as black opals, confirming Numair's theory of why Karthak was interested in Dunlath and why Dunlath would have a new mine open. Taka whistles a song that makes the rocks glow, and Kitten imitates it successfully. On to chapter 7. Mora falls asleep for the night while Daine and Taka discuss plans for the next day and recon. The wolves return then with people food that they stole for Daine and Mora, things like cheese, sausages, and eggs. Daine is stressed that they're going to be hunted even more now, but the wolves are not fussed. They have also brought the squirrel named Flicker that Daine healed earlier, and he is interested in helping. Cloud and Daine head to the southern fort, where Daine joins with Flicker's minds to go into the officers' quarters and get the information from paperwork. Among the papers of duty rosters and supply lists is a parchment from Karthak bearing the Emperor's seal, with a notice that Numair was to be captured alive and transported to Karthak, Kitten was to be captured alive for a bounty, and Daine, labeled as the dragon's handler, was to be killed. In the original, Rikosh happens to roost outside the officer's quarters, spots Flicker, says some mean things, tries to blast him with Stormwing magic, and Flicker with Daine escapes when regular humans open the door and do not understand why the Stormwing is shouting, "Get the squirrel." I would scrap this antagonism, and I feel the need to explain why Rikosh is the character who is being changed the most by this restructure. By not having a fourth book, that cuts out a third of the time that Daine and Rikosh have interaction and relationship with each other. This is also why I wanted to introduce him sooner and emphasize his neutral, polite dialogue toward Taka and switch his threat toward Daine from Stormwing personal to a protector warning. They acknowledge at the end of this book and in the third book that they have no actual beef with each other, and they weirdly definitely have a snarky, friendly vibe. So this restructure softens Rikosh very slightly away from aggression that's really only present here in the second book. Instead of attacking Flicker, Rikosh is just curious about seeing a tree rat inside, seemingly with a purpose, so he just watches from the roost. He can warn Flicker to mind the sharp feathers, shocking Daine. I think it's canon that Rikosh gives no shit about the human politics going on. He was happy to be sent far from the king that he serves but distrusts, and delighted to find friendship with Mora, so he's got no reason to get hot and bothered about a weird squirrel. He might even go out on a limb to ask if the squirrel understands him, and then when the squirrel doesn't respond, just talk aloud anyway, that if he sees a little girl out there in the forest and she needs help, the squirrel could let him know. Humans eventually open the door, Flicker bolts on instinct, and Rikosh snaps at the humans. When Daine returns to herself, her hands and feet are squirrel-shaped, and she doesn't have time to wait for them to go back to normal. She needs to get away from the fort. They head out, and her feet are still more squirrel than human when she stops for the night. The badger god comes along then to explain her misunderstanding about his suggestion about her lessons. He fixes her feet for her, but also opens an opportunity for her to vent about Numair with a new subtext of the ache of missing him. In the original, the badger tells Daine that she can trust Numair's instincts regarding her magic and not being crazy, even if she won't trust her own. But no. He can simply reinforce that she can trust her instincts and herself when it comes to her control. Just because she misunderstood what he meant about shape changing, her method of learning is still working to get the same results. Their conversation makes it clear that Daine was guided to Dunlath to serve the greater machinations of the gods, as one of the rare people with the ability to communicate with any human, any animals, and any immortals. He encourages her to reconsider her hatred of Stormwings, as she has now seen they are not all evil by default, and other immortals are suffering, and she can help. For the sake of keeping capital C chaos at bay, they need her to succeed here. Daine does not have to understand why that's the case yet. The next day is rainy, but Daine makes it back to the cave where Mora and the wolves are with Kitten. Taka tells Daine Mora has been scared by some of the wolves on purpose. And they work it out then so that when Daine heads north, he will carry Mora to be nearby when Flicker and Daine are done at the northern fort. Along the way, they pass the mining camp again, reminding Daine of the situation the ogres and other enslaved humans are being kept in. I want to add another Immortals encounter while they're on their way or just before reaching the site they pick behind a ridgeline. Unicorns are mentioned but never actually seen throughout the series, so for the restructure, stick one in here. Calmly walking past, acknowledging the group seemingly only because Taka is there, and continuing on their way, disinterested and fearless. This awe-inspiring appearance of a magic horse reinforces what the badger told Daine was her purpose here. I like the idea of the unicorn deliberately not letting Daine into its mind, sending and receiving no magical telepathy from Daine. Reaching to try and communicate with the unicorn is like standing in the ocean, hearing the whale songs and the whales refusing to hear her. Flicker has a harder time this time because it's so close to dark and he's terrified of the dark, but this time they do not have any run-ins. When she returns to herself, Daine is all the way a squirrel, shrunken and unable to speak like a person. She has to focus and remember what makes her Daine, not just her body, but her experiences and relationships as well. This is just to reinforce what this restructure encourages, that Daine is the one in control of both her human essence and wielding her wild magic without losing her sense of self, no barrier spell required to keep the parts separate. Chapter 8, when Daine is herself again, she learns that Mora found an ogre in the woods, someone who escaped, named Yakuju. Her demeanor can be summarized as placid. She explains that her people were tricked to coming to Dunlath. They were told that there would be good farmland. That's what her clan and kin like to do, is farm. Other ogres like to fight, and groups are different, just like mortal people groups are different. For this restructure, I would just like to stick in that Yakujo may say she was following the unicorn until Mora found her. When Mora discusses her land that she will inherit when she comes of age, that it's uphill and not suitable for farming, Yakujo is excited instead. Her people have terracing methods that she is confident would work. If there were something worth fighting for, she thinks her kin people might help Mora fight to get her honor and her land back. They head back for the wolves' caves and the area where Numair is on the other side of the barrier. Before they get there, one of the Huntmaster's dogs finds Daine and leads her to a pit where Tate is trapped. Taka takes the message and information from Daine on to Numair, while Daine, Mora, and Yakujo help Tate get out of the trap. While he's cleaning up, Daine mind melds with an eagle to overlook the fort, and notices a column of toxic-looking smoke that the eagle avoids without her needing to say anything. He tells her he doesn't need to fly through death to recognize it. For the restructure, Daine and the eagle, Hunt Song, could potentially spot a chaos vent somewhere in the forest as well, something that Taka can identify with mild concern if Daine describes it to him. The details for the chaos vent should evoke something of what Alana reported back in Wild Magic, when she and the King's Own were unable to capture the local lord illegally dealing with Karthak. There are Stormwings and Huroks searching the area Daine was before, so she returns to herself and has to transform from eagle shape back to herself to warn the others they need to get under cover. She hides with Tate, and he explains why he's not going back to the castle either, and not inclined to make Mora return. One of the mages that Tristan introduced, a woman named Gisa, Tate witnessed her running out to the courtyard, screaming about "get it off" before cutting off her own hand where her skin was already bubbling. This alarmed him enough that he did not want to stay anymore. During this discussion, he names Weirin for the second time, leading Daine to ask about the local hunt god. When she mentions the name of the village she's originally from, Tate makes it clear he's heard stories about her. I think he's clever enough to connect Wolf Girl stories from last year, shapeshifting girl in front of him now, asking him about the local hunt god, and clever enough to pretend that he does not make the connection. While they spend quite a while hiding, Daine makes the loose connection between the toxic smoke that she and the eagle saw with Gisa's bubbling skin. I haven't mentioned the Darking since talking about Chapter 5, but there isn't anything it needs to do besides hang around Mora, be cute and keep her company while Daine runs around doing the plot. Now when Taka returns bringing information about Alana and other soldiers who are moving into the surrounding area, Daine decides she needs to get closer to the village to mind meld with an animal in the castle to get information about what Tristan is brewing. Here, the Darking, who has mastered verbal communication thanks to Taka and Mora, can suggest the cats, where in the original Daine simply manages to find the cats. The Darking can finally explain that it was born in the castle, split off from another Darking that is still there, that originally came with Tristan from Karthak and is kept locked up when Tristan isn't using it for spying purposes. Because Tristan didn't know it was born or split from the first Darking, it has existed freely in the shadows, making friends with the mice and cats. The two cats Daine meets are Blueness, a large, dignified older cat, and Scrap, a slim adolescent cat able to get into any place. She takes Daine to the mage's workroom where Gisa is being fitted with a metal prosthetic hand. They are arguing who is to blame the most for the loss of Gisa's hand when Yolaine comes in, stressed out because she's learned the King's Own and the Lioness are getting closer to Dunlath. Tristan explains his plot of ecocide to Yolaine, convincing her it's never going to affect her, except to make people think twice about crossing her in the future. He is manipulating her ambition for the throne and her vanity, all in service to Ozorn. There is no reason given to believe he's motivated by any genuine affection for her. Yolaine's husband does not seem to care if there's an affair carrying on directly in front of his nose. Daine borrows a village horse to head back towards the others, telepathically brokering a peace between the wolf pack and the hunter's dogs before they all meet up at the barrier near where Numair is on the other side. While she waits for Taka and the others with him to reach her, she writes out the information about the poison that Tristan is brewing and the other information she's gathered. She does not add anything to the note about missing him, but to build into the romance, she can take a line or two to think about a particular look of his eyes or remembering the way firelight gilds his dark face. I never turned on my backlight. Well, there it is now. Chapter 9 begins, and the forces to oppose Dunlath and Tristan are nearly all gathered, but not quite ready to commence battle. After sunrise, Taka and Yakujo cross the barrier to meet Numair, and Daine rejoins the Marmot's mind. Numair summons a kind of mirror portal that connects them to Raoul and Alana to discuss forward strategy. A minor change would be to have Numair crouch down to the Marmot's level when they are talking through her to Daine, a simple gesture of politeness from a very tall Numair that would be fully in character for him anyway. And this action would also be a parallel to an earlier moment when Daine held a mirror up for him so that he could shave more easily. In order for the soldiers to get into the valley, the barrier around it must be broken. Numair theorizes there must be a replica of the valley somewhere in Tristan's workroom, and the barrier projected around it is being projected around the real valley. They need Daine to find and destroy it. If there is trouble at the forts at either end of the valley, they think that Tristan and the other mages will go to deal with it, leaving the castle lightly defended by regular soldiers and no mages. Iyakuju believes she can persuade her people to cause trouble in the north. Taka declares he can make trouble at the south, but may need help as he is a single large target. Taka, Daine, and Yakujo return to the others. The wolves decide to help the ogres. Tate, his dogs, and Mora decide to help Taka. Mora says she can light the fort on fire if they can get close enough. They come up with a signal to start the attack, for Numair to strike the barrier from the outside like he did the day he first ran into it. The horse that Daine borrowed from the village bears Tate and Mora away to the south. Flicker suggests to Daine that she could recruit squirrels around the southern fort too, because so many of them lost homes and whole families due to the logging. Those forts are made of logs, aren't they? He says. He also points out that those downstream will be poisoned by Tristan's potion when he puts it in the river. Cloud carries Kitten and Daine, while Daine mind melds with the same eagle again to scope out everyone's preparations for the attack. The Darking will accompany Daine with the intent of finding and freeing its creator Darking. While she's with the eagle, a group of Stormwings first flies past them on their own mission. In the original, Rikosh banks and remarks about eagles and how they don't usually fly straight lines, they circle and circle. He's offended by the strange behavior of the wildlife in this forest and tries to attack the eagle. This milder restructure of Rikosh has him notice the same thing, circle the eagle himself, simply say, curious, and return to the formation. Other Stormwings, though, need less incentive to make a problem, and a pair of them go after the eagle, leading to the same entanglement with the trees that exists in the original, but this time Rikosh remains aloft and laughing at the fools of his cohort. Daine is much quicker now with regaining her own shape as she leaves the mind meld. She, Cloud, Kitten, and with the addition of the Darking, are outside the village and castle before nightfall. The next morning, at the appointed hour, Numair strikes the barrier, ringing out like a bell. First, an explosion from the south, set off by Mora sparking kegs of flour. Messages arrive from the north about the enslaved ogres and enslaved humans revolting. When the mages leave the castle, with different immortals carrying them north or south, Daine moves in quickly and meets up with Blueness and Scrap in person. The Darking is happy to be reunited with his tumble friends, but Daine is on a mission and they search for the model of the valley and barrier. Yolaine finds them in Tristan's room and is dismayed when Daine tells her that everything has been uncovered and Yolaine will face the Crown's justice. Finally, Scrap leads Daine to the tower where Daine realizes she must have seen the toxic smoke rising from before. When they try to get up to the tower, though, they encounter a second Cold Fang. This one manages to knock Daine down a flight of stairs, disorienting her and getting her crossbow bolts knocked everywhere but her quiver. Chapter 10. When Daine stops falling, she runs into the nearest room, which is an armory, but there's very little she is tall enough to reach or strong enough to properly wield. She is an excellent archer, she is not a trained fighter. When the Cold Fang traps Daine with its trancing gaze, Kitten bites it, successfully with her immortal fangs. The two cats launch themselves at the Cold Fang, and for this restructure, the Darking can repeat whatever attack it attempted the first time, wrapping the Cold Fang's eyes to free Daine. Scrap is sent flying by the Cold Fang. Daine manages to bring up an axe. Blueness and Kitten get out of the way, and she strikes the Cold Fang on the head, embedding the axe in its brain and killing it. Scrap has been killed by the throw. Tamara Pierce was given a lot of grief over a cat that she wrote being killed in the Song of the Lioness series. This time around, Daine literally yells at the animal gods that they owe her. She wouldn't even be here if they hadn't brought her here, and the cat wouldn't have been killed. Luckily, they are inclined to agree, and the first female cat god restores Scrap's life. Daine and Kitten the dragon continue up to the tower and find the model of the valley and the projected barrier being anchored by 2 black opals. Before Daine breaks it, they find the locked box where the original Darking is contained. I have not mentioned up to now, but the reason that Daine has Kitten with her at the castle is because Kitten can whistle spells that open locks or else destroy them if they won't come undone, and she has done so several times throughout. She can free the Darking while Daine breaks the opals. When Daine does, a trap that Tristan set on them knocks Daine unconscious. She regains consciousness when Numair reaches her and wafts the equivalent of smelling salts. He prioritizes getting rid of the poisonous potion before grabbing Daine in a hug. Once again, the original does not contain any subtext, and it is an appropriate hug of relief. For the restructure, splicing in some detail from the chapter in Realms of the Gods when Numair thought Daine had died but found her. Originally, they embrace, lock eyes, and then dive into a first kiss. For this restructure, carry over everything except the kiss itself. Before Numair can get pulled in by the glowy-dovey eyes that Daine is lifting to him, he's quick to apologize for grabbing her, heat of the moment, and talk over anything that she might try to say by telling her what he knows of that's happened in the battles since she was unconscious. I mentioned at the beginning of this video aging up Daine, but because this video doesn't have the beginning of Wild Magic or the beginning part of Wolfspeaker, you would not have heard that I said Daine was 15 at the time of Wild Magic, and now in Wolfspeaker, 1.5 years later, she is 16 and a half and getting closer to 17. So that is the point that she is at here, where Numair grabs her in a hug but doesn't kiss her and apologizes and pretends that it didn't get that intense. They leave the tower to find Tristan, who makes it easy by landing in the courtyard shortly after. He and Numair begin a mage battle, and Daine gets up to the wall to intercede before the Stormwing's en route can support Tristan. There is nothing to change about her final exchange with Rikash. It's well in line with the milder adaptations to his character. She points out that they have no quarrel, and the Carthaki mages have clearly lost. Rikash agrees and tells his flock it's time to report to the Emperor that he'll be getting no more opals from Dunlath. Tristan and Numair's battle ends when Tristan sends a fiery tornado toward Daine and Numair turns him into a tree, ending the bit of magic before it reaches Daine. I don't know why, I always forget that this is the thing that I actually dislike Numair for the most. Not his teacher-student age gap romance with Daine, and not the fact that he's a liar, but that he turned a man into a tree, which means a tree across the world turned into a man, and Numair did a bad job taking care of the man that he created. That is the truth of the chip in my shoulder about Numair. You can read Elder Brother if you want to know about the tree turned into a man. It is in Tortal and Other Lands, a short story collection, but I am pretty sure that particular story can be found in other fiction anthologies. Numair is worn out, but Daine isn't done yet. She goes to find Yolaine and finds Belden first, having taken a poison of his own to avoid the crown's justice. Yolaine took a horse and has been riding away from Dunlath for the last few hours. Daine leads the wolves to Yolaine's room so that they can get a good deep sniff on her scent, then shapeshifts her own body deliberately for the first time to wolf form. As a pack member, Daine hunts down Yolaine. Daine has been hunted before by the villagers that she grew up with after she killed the bandits who killed her mother. Now here, she hunts down another young woman as a wolf herself. While this should invoke her past trauma, it also doesn't need to hold her back. It's part of how she became who she is now. For most of the hunt in the original, she keeps her sense of self and her purpose, which is to stop and capture Yolaine. The heat of the hunt catches up to her at the end, and Daine does make a lunge that nearly gets her brained by Yolaine's horse. After the horse throws Yolaine off, when she hits the mare with her riding crop, Yolaine is stunned, and Daine transforms back into herself. She discovers that clothes do not come with full shapeshifting, but luckily they are near the caves where Daine left some of her supplies, including clothes that she intended to wash before wearing again. The only thing that stays with her when she transforms is the badger's claw on its leather cord. The badger's claw is something that the badger god gave her so that he could track her down wherever she was in the mortal realms. Daine does not have to walk Yolaine all the way back to the castle. Some of the king's own, along with Raoul, Alana, and Numair, catch up to them not long after. Yolaine declares herself guilty to Raoul and demands that he get her away from the wolves. We are the wolves at the gate, our numbers growing every day. The epilogue is primarily goodbyes, laying out for the reader what's going to happen with all of the new characters introduced in this book. And essentially all of them are staying at Dunlath to work with Mora, including Flicker the Squirrel, the Long Lake Wolf Pack, Iakuju, and the Ogres, Tate, and Saka. This will also include the two Darkings, who remain not fully understood, but are perceived as harmless and accepted as friends of the mice and cats, trustworthy spies and allies to Mora. The very end of the original is Numair tousling Daine's hair, and I would keep that, but include an extra long glance from Daine, which Numair is plainly deliberately avoiding. He wants to be able to be comfortable and non-intimate, but Daine doesn't think she wants to be settled with that platonic note. But she is happier to be going home to Anawa and to grieve Miri properly. My version ends with Numair saying, "Let's go home, Wild Mage." Or we could do a title drop. He could call her Wolf Speaker this one time and get a grin out of her, dissipating her discontent about the hair tousle. Which do you think is a stronger end note? For Numair to call her Wild Mage or to call her Wolf Speaker? And at last we get to Emperor Mage. And this one was really fun. I think this is where a lot of the good stuff happens. As I said, Wolf Speaker took place in fall, where Daine was about 16 and a half. I had two options for this restructure when it came to Emperor Mage. One was to keep it along the same timeline as originally, which would bring Daine up to 17 the following fall. But I would rather push to the next fall, where it puts Daine at 18 and allow that 2 full years to absorb any of the Immortals conflicts from Realms of the Gods that absolutely had to happen, but Daine or Numair did not need to be around for. This is time that Daine spent quietly pining, but realizing that her former teacher was not going to reciprocate, and so she has pursued a few kisses with other fellows between the books. She trusts Numair like no other, and partly that's because he's actively not trying to draw her to him, but still maintains the trust and interdependence, while Tortall fends off Carthaki raids and Immortals infiltrations, and they work together to keep Tortall safe. The Realms of the Gods opens with a brief prologue just to describe the midwinter dawn when the mage-made barrier between the realms collapsed completely and everyone with gift magic, wild magic, or immortal magic felt it happen. For the restructure, the collapse of the barrier, and thus any ability to control portals that open and close to send immortals through, is lost to Ozorn, and this is the main factor that pushes him to agree to peace talks after holding out since the espionage and attempted ecocide uncovered in Dunlath. Actually experiencing the barrier collapse doesn't seem necessary and can be included in the first and or the second part of Chapter 1 as something discussed between participants on either side of the Carthaki-Tortallan conflict. Here we go. Chapter 1 opens with the scene on Prince Kadar, waiting for the diplomatic delegation from Tortall to arrive to begin peace talks between them with witnesses of other delegations from other countries in the north. I would keep Kadar largely the same, including keeping him at 16 and all the changes in dynamic that may result between him and Daine, him already being vaguely attracted but unnerved by her in the original. Something I forgot to mention in my video on Tempest and Slaughter, Kadar would have been born sometime around the end of that book. There is no way to dice the timeline where he's born after Tempest and Slaughter. Ozorn has only younger sisters, and at the end of Tempest and Slaughter, he is resisting his mother's indications that he should look at getting married. He is 17 at that time. There is something of an overlap between Ozorn and Kadar regarding the death of each of their fathers. This is potentially a recycled plot idea that wasn't caught in the editing. However, it's not really outside the realm of possibility that Ozorn orchestrated a situation where Kadar experiences the same loss that he did. To clarify some of the cast roles, the diplomatic delegation includes Alana as the crown representative of John, Lord Martin and Duke Gareth as the ones invested to negotiate. Daine is there to heal the Emperor's birds as a gesture of Tortall's goodwill, and Numair is there with the Emperor's pardon as a gesture of Carthag's goodwill. The Tortallan delegation is all crammed together in a ship's cabin where they're having a conversation that can be slightly expanded to include a mention that Jonathan's possession of the Dominion Jewel is what made the difference in holding the coast as much as they have, but it comes at a cost the more that it's used. And Jonathan does not want to rely on it for anything where there is another option. This conversation includes clarifying their purpose and behavior expectations and what is at stake if these peace talks should fail. After that, Daine goes back to her cabin to change into fresh, fancy clothes designed and provided for her by Queen Thyet. The male badger god manifests there to scold her for leaving Tortal because she doesn't know how dangerous it is for her specifically to be in Carthag. Here we can add in a line through this dialogue of the badger accusing Daine of intentionally aiding the goddess of chaos by leaving her home turf. For the restructure, this is where talk of the capital C chaos goddess Uwusoe shifts from vague and general to specific and current. The badger god behaves oddly at the end of their visit, commanding Daine to kneel down, breathing a silver fog on her and vanishing. When she goes up to the deck after that, she finds the wharf lined with animals of all shapes and sizes waiting to greet her and unnerving all the humans. She thanks them for their kindness and asks them to go home before the people start to get upset. They go, and Daine finds Numair at the rail. For the restructure, Daine's perception of Numair can take a little shine that the original does not have. Even when he's clearly startled by her loveliness here, she already understands and grudgingly accepts he's never going to breach their teacher bond and partner bond, no matter how he looks at her or compliments her in this moment. She is more than willing to credit the outfit that Thayat designed for getting any reaction at all. Alana pops up beside them before the moment gets awkward, and her role is elevated in this restructure so that she's not even subtle from the start that she's technically Daine's chaperone, the only unattached woman in their delegation. Alana also supplements for the absence of both friend-like sister Anua and horse sister Cloud. I think Daine at 18 would be considered adult enough in Alana's eyes. She's going to support whichever way her two friends jump, with consent all around, or to be a comfort for an impending letdown all around. Daine tells Numair she needs to talk to him when they get a chance, but he is understandingly preoccupied. The delegation meets Kadar and the Imperial Welcoming Committee. Daine doesn't pay much attention. Kitten scampers off to try to talk to one of the rowers, and this brings her and Daine closer into contact with slavery than what they found in Dunlath 2 years before. When Daine and Kitten are presented to Kadar, he is interested in Kitten but prevented from getting too deep into conversation. Numair introduces Daine to Lyndall Reed after that, his former teacher and later a friend. Although Lyndall would love to talk to Daine anything and everything about animals, Numair pulls him away then. Alana borrows Kitten to introduce her to others, and Daine is alone as their ship passes a display of the North Coast Army and Navy of Carthag. Because this restructure has a greater time span of conflict, Daine can reflect here on something like the constant raids Port Lagan has been resisting. By numbers, Daine thinks even if they could fight Carthag off, what would be left of Tortal after? Kadar joins her at the rail to share the fact that this is just one army and there are 3 others of equal size. They have a tense exchange about crocodiles and animal nature, and soon after Daine sees a pygmy marmoset burdened with a jeweled metal collar dropped off the side of another boat. Without hesitating or remembering that Numair has telekinetic magic and has grabbed her from the water before, Daine dives in to save the pygmy marmoset and pleads for the crocodiles to let it be. He wasn't more than a mouthful. They concede but tell her not to interfere again. There wasn't enough food as it was. Numair pulls Daine from the water. Her lovely outfit is ruined, and Daine wishes she had the power to vanish. She makes it to the guest quarters at the palace and gets acquainted with the marmoset while she cleans up. She decides to name him Zek because she rescued him from the Zakoi River. I think it's Zek. It's Z-E-K. I guess let me know if you think it's Zek or Zeke. Before she leaves her room, she touches a tiger skin rug that she's sad to see in her quarters, and then the rug blinks and starts to move. Kitten and Zek see it too. Chapter 2 is titled Imperial Welcome, and the first part is the grand to-do of presenting the entire Tortalan delegation to Emperor Ozorn, possibly with the exclusion of Numair, although he is present. Daine spends some page space reflecting, and again, for this restructure, this space could absorb new losses that would have been in Realms of the Gods. Here she could briefly remember Miri, even if her name itself isn't given here. You might have to watch part 1 if you haven't read the Immortals series and want to know anything about Miri. Like Kadar, Ozorn is interested in Kitten and asks a few questions, and she whistles the stone lighting spell that she learned in the previous book, amusing him. The many diplomats and representatives mingle and eat after the audience with Ozorn is concluded, and there Varys comes out of the woodwork, seemingly to sweep Numair up if possible. You can read the original book with the subtext that Numair and Varys briefly rekindle their romance, but I do think the more common headcanon is that really was just Daine being a little bit jealous, and while Numair and Varys clearly reconnect, neither of them have much reason to rekindle whatever they had a decade ago. Something to understand about Varese: she is designed to fool the reader, and she behaves to fool the people around her. Her specialty is kitchen magic, and she serves as the imperial hostess. She's the seemingly ditzy, busty, beautiful blonde, followed by a sweet perfume cloud who is as sharp as a blade. At the reception, Daine sits by herself for most of the time. Lindahl spends some time talking about animals and the Emperor's birds with her. When she is alone again, Kitten starts to alert with irritation that someone is invisible near them, and Daine warns the person to drop the spell before Kitten bites. When the invisibility drops, it reveals Ozorn, who is behaving close to a normal person at this point. For this restructure, after he sat beside Daine and Zek, Kitten uses her whistle again to lift the invisibility on a particular pendant that is very different from all the other gold and gems the Emperor is wearing. The words to describe this twisted black glass looking item are to evoke in the keen reader the descriptions used around Alana's Ember token in Wild Magic. Patiently, Ozorn can touch it to recast the invisibility and ask Kitten not to do that again. The reason Ozorn is able to walk around invisibly is a simulacrum of himself occupies the chair, as he claims they do not need the man for these events, only the image. He says he cannot attach a seeming of his magic to it, which is something Daine knows Numair can do, but she does not share this fact. She asks about his birds, and the Emperor seems to genuinely warm and take her to see them. He sends notice to Lindahl to meet them at the aviary and to Duke Gareth that Daine is in his company. He overrules Daine's stated preference when it comes to what name he calls her by, using her full Varaladain name. Daine is enraptured by the beauty of the aviary and the living feathered gems the Emperor keeps, and the birds have nothing but good to say of the man who visited them often. Lindahl remains while the Emperor returns to business. Daine goes through and heals the birds that are sick, but isn't able to identify what caused the illness to begin with. She also ruins yet another lovely gown because she didn't change before seeing to the birds. Lindahl walks her back to her room and warns her not to suggest poison to the Emperor because he will have all of the enslaved people who take care of the birds executed even if they have nothing to do with it or it wasn't true, possibly tortured for information even though they are all already mute. Outside of Daine's quarters in the original, a young enslaved person is mentioned, but no detail is given. For this restructure, this character is a young woman, a year or two younger than Daine, with medium brown skin, a face that does not stand out as ugly or as pretty, large dark eyes, and dark hair shaved close, dressed in a plain white linen tunic. She will come up again. The next morning, Daine's work with the birds earns her praise from Duke Gareth because the Emperor's satisfaction with her work turned the early negotiation discussions to Tortall's favor. But they are now headed to a tour of the Imperial Menagerie, and Daine is already stressed out because she empathizes too deeply with animals kept in cages. Chapter 3 is called Hall of Bones. Daine does not have as bad of a time as she expected because Ozorn prioritizes the care of animals well above the care of other humans. For captive animals, it's mostly the ones who are born in the wild that somewhat miss their native homes. They reach the hyena enclosure, and Daine is fascinated by their design, claiming that the god who made them was one with imagination. Varese, though, leads them away because the hyenas are not an exhibit intended for imperial guests, but Daine promises them she'll come back to visit. The next menagerie is as bad as Daine expected, but this enclosure is all immortal creatures kept in cages that are far too small and definitely fed nothing. Because immortal creatures do not need food to exist, they live unless they are killed. Among these is a Stormwind queen, Barja, and her consort Hebach. Daine learns from Kadar that Ozorn's alliance with the Stormwind king Jokun required these two to be kept imprisoned. Gareth deflects the attention here from Daine and how upset she is to how overheated he's becoming under Carthag's fierce sun. When the delegation returns to their quarters to change, Daine finds what she thinks is an elder enslaved woman cleaning up her room. Not to bury the lead, the woman is the graveyard hag, but Daine doesn't figure that out for a while yet. The hag leads her through a conversation on the conditions of Carthag, adding in here some detail about the ruined cropland that is motivating Ozorn's need to conquer fresh territory. She draws Daine's attention to the presence of one darking in her room. Daine befriends this one with the same kindness and food treats that worked with the previous ones, simple courtesies that these creatures, commanded to stay in the shadows, to observe and listen and be unseen, have never experienced. Kitten is exasperated this entire time because she knows the old woman is the graveyard hag. When Daine is distracted by Kitten, the graveyard hag scoops up the tiger skin rug that Daine had pushed away out of sight and dumps it into Daine's arms. A flash of some magic weakens Daine, and suddenly the skin of the tiger is moving like it's a whole cat and very pleased with itself. The enslaved young woman assigned to serve Daine's room comes in at her shout, but there is no older enslaved woman that she sees, and the tiger skin is out of her view. When Daine sees the skin is keeping still, she tells the young woman it's upsetting to her and asks her to take it away, thanking her when she does. Alana pops back up to collect Daine for their next banquet. Negotiations are opened for the afternoon. Daine is horribly bored, and Gareth is a reasonable and understanding man, sending her a note that she is not needed for this part. She is free to do as she likes until the evening banquet. Lindahl is on hand to lead her to the Hall of Bones, Carthag's equivalent of a natural history museum. If you know anything about dinosaurs, you can recognize them pretty easily by Tamara Pierce's written descriptions. Enraptured, Daine touches and briefly wakes up a complete fossilized triceratops skeleton with the same flash of magic that made the tiger skin move. It seems to pass, and she keeps her hands to herself after that. The last exhibit they get to is the mammoths, and Daine remarks that all these wonders make her almost wish she could stay. Lindahl notices that she says almost and says he imagines they could learn as much from her as she could from them. Daine demurs that she's just a girl with wild magic, and when she leaves next week, Carthag won't remember she was there. Lindahl insists that he will, and so will the Emperor's birds, and Daine answers she couldn't ask for more. Of course, foreshadowing, Daine's deflection proves untrue. Nightfall finds Daine in yet another stunning dress designed by Thayet that draws not only a compliment from Numair, but he lightly touches her cheek. He makes a comment here that I would modify from the original to just, "You'll be married to a deserving fellow before I realize it." Daine, while thinking she might be in love with Numair, does not care for the idea of marriage, and her scoffing this off spares them both from his unintended intensity. Daine finally gets to mention to him that the badger visited her, but she doesn't get to tell him everything before they are swept up with the crowd into a banquet hall with a view over a lake. Before long, 2 stormwings land on the rail outside the window, one wearing a crown and one that Daine and Numair recognize. Chapter 4, there isn't anything to change from the reunion conversation between Daine and Rikosh, never truly enemies, nearly cordial adversaries. It's here that Ozorn informs Rikosh that Daine and her wild magic were the cause of the strange behavior he noticed in the animals of Dunlath. At the banquet, Numair is seated beside Varys, and Daine is way at the other end with Kadar. They are awkward and nearly unfriendly until they settle on a safe conversation around Kitten, but the ice is properly broken when Zek pops out and they talk more about each other's interests. Ultimately, Daine reveals to Kadar that she no longer eats game meat, and it's mostly only fish and some domesticated meat that she will sometimes eat. Since she learned to shapeshift, she's been hunted in deer form and goose form and can no longer eat game. After dinner, musicians and acrobats perform for the entertainment, followed by the appearance of a few Banjiku people. The Banjiku seem to be a type of pygmy people, and I suspect Tamara Pierce would describe them differently if she were rewriting this part today. They have brought performing animals, who, like all animals, immediately go to Daine. She quickly realizes all of these Banjiku people are laced with wild magic, and the elder man among them identifies her as a god, and when she denies it, says that one of her parents was then, and he wants to know who it was so they can make their own offerings. Ozorn is present to hear all of this as Daine answers that she doesn't know her father. In the original, she is still in denial about who the horned man she's seen in her dream and her death vision is, but honestly, what is the narrative purpose of this besides drawing out the confirmation until the 4th book? It's reasonable enough for her to publicly still claim that she doesn't know, but internally she absolutely does. Numair has come over to Daine's end of the table as well, and Ozorn here tells her it was originally studying the Banjiku people that convinced Numair wild magic was real. For the restructure, somewhere after this exchange, but before Daine falls asleep that night, she has a brief contemplation of if she should change her surname. It's reached a point where she does know Weirin is her father. This is a form of confirmation from the Banjiku if she wants to hear it. She could claim it and not be mocked as a bastard anymore. As in Realms of the Gods, though, she likes who she has grown to be with the name she has, and does not feel compelled to try to be known as her father's daughter. When all performances are concluded, Numair, Lindal, and Daine are talking outside when Rikosh interrupts their conversation. Lindal politely excuses himself. In keeping with the milder restructure for Rikosh, he's not as aggressive when Zek pops out. He's come over to them clearly to ask about Mora of Dunlath. He has not been free to visit, and he does not have any ability to write letters, which Daine has been able to do. This conversation could easily be slightly expanded to give more information about Mora and the condition of Dunlath and Tortall over the last 2 years of ongoing skirmishes. The conversation ends when Daine obliquely accuses Rikosh of partaking the imprisonment of Barja and Habak, but Rikosh's initial reaction is rejection, that no Stormwing queens are missing. Jokun took her crown and reported her body fell in the ocean. Daine insists she's in the menagerie, and Rikosh takes off. When Daine is alone again, Ozorn approaches her to ask about his birds and to thank her again for her assistance. In the original, he offers to reward her. Daine replies the health of his birds is the only reward she needs, and he leaves her with that. But for the restructure, this can be expanded to his lightly insisting and Daine as firmly insisting no, which is not something Ozorn appreciates. But he smiles this time and leaves a soft promise that he will come up with a reward if she cannot think of one for herself. Kadar finds her next outside and asks if she would like his company and a guided tour tomorrow during the negotiations. Daine accepts. She goes off into the darkness by herself, and this time takes off her fancy dress before she invites the local bats to come land on her to greet them. She does need a whistled neatening up spell from Kitten afterwards, but the dress at least isn't ruined. Immediately after, first they hear and then spot what look like Rikosh and the older enslaved woman from Daine's room earlier, but her appearance is different than it was before. Even after the hag brings out a silver cup and rattles the dice inside, gambling with Rikosh, Daine approaches them now, thinking that Rikosh is going to get this woman in trouble. The hag teases Daine and leaps off the balcony, confusing her, and in the original she's still blaming Rikosh. But without the previous antagonism and being a more experienced and older Daine, this Daine isn't as quick to assume that that was just a regular enslaved woman, especially when Rikosh laughs at the suggestion. There is a steel feather left on the railing, leading them into a conversation about the nature of Stormwings, and Rikosh guesses that Daine wanted to try shapeshifting to a dragon form, but was warned that shapeshifting to immortal form was permanent. Rikosh admits that he saw Barja in the menagerie, and Daine was right. For the restructure, this conversation can expand to include Daine asking if it was wise to visit her with Jokun still around. Rikosh can snark, since when are Stormwings wise? And expresses his bitterness at the disloyalty of other Stormwings to their proper queen and lack of adhering to Stormwing neutrality. They aren't supposed to be anyone's allies. They're supposed to be nightmare creatures of any battlefield, no matter who is fighting or why. Daine can ask here, and he can tell her the origin of Stormwings. From a traveler who hated the aftermath of war she continually found and dreamed of a creature that would desecrate the bodies of warriors so they could not lie about the glory of battle. The majority of this was discussed while Rikosh and other Stormwings helped Numair and Daine fly across the Sea of Sand to get to the Dragonlands. Back to as it was in the original, a group of people come and join them on the outside terrace. Rikosh makes a show of gifting the steel feather to Ozorn, asking Daine to deliver it, and explaining that at the absolute utmost need, when his life and throne were in peril, he could thrust the feather into his flesh and be delivered from danger on wings of steel. Ozorn accepts the gift, but replies that neither his person or his throne are in any danger. Alana is on hand as well to keenly observe this entire exchange, and it would be completely in character for her to fidget with her token ember at this point, reminding a reader she has it, and the familiar reader may know she's looking to see what magic is occurring at this moment. The long night finally comes to a conclusion, but Daine still wakes before dawn the next morning. She leaves Kitten and Zek in her room as she goes to the aviary to check on the birds. She shapeshifts to fly around with them, losing track of time until a pair of people with angry voices enter the aviary. From the branches, she spots Numair and Ozorn looking for her. This scene is the only one-on-one interaction between Numair and Ozorn for this entire series, former best friends that they are. In the original series, Numair abruptly realizes he might love Daine in the prologue of Realms of the Gods, but for the canon of this restructure, he realizes it here when Ozorn calls Daine his toy to his face. There isn't anything that needs changing from the conversation. Ozorn's original accusation includes, you take up with someone, make them feel you are their sworn friend, then turn on them the moment you have what you wanted from them. to highlight the subtext that definitely already exists through their argument, removed sworn friends to make them feel you are theirs, is also in keeping with the canon implication that Ozorn felt all mages trained at the Carthage University were his proprietary tools. Ozorn asks if Numair has to share the bed with Daine's animals as well, and Numair swings, stopped by Ozorn's magical shield. Realistically, I don't know why Ozorn wouldn't use that to immediately re-arrest Numair. Game over. He doesn't, and Numair walks away after threatening if Ozorn bothers Daine, all of the Eastern lands will unite to destroy Ozorn. Daine then watches Ozorn manifest a palm-sized simulacra of Numair and proceed to torture it. She doesn't watch that part, but the realistic screaming follows her as she shapeshifts, gets back to her clothes, and gets out of the aviary. At breakfast, Daine and Numair are separately subdued and silent. Then, after Numair tells Daine they have time to speak in his room, Alanna hops up to join them. Numair is ready to be irritated at the chaperonage, but it's just as well if Daine tells Alanna also. Inside Numair's room, he rages the magical protections around inside the walls. The day before, the Darking stayed in Daine's quarters, but she brings it with her now to show them. Numair recognizes the creature, Alanna less so, but also it calls out to its kin who has been placed in Numair's room. The Darkings confer, and Numair is very lucky the Darking decided to do that, as he was prepared to set up a simulacra of his own in his room after this conversation. Daine tells Alanna and Numair what the Badger told her and how this visit on the ship ended with the Badger disappearing. Then she touches the stuffed vulture on display in the room to show them what the new power does, bringing a dead creature back to life. The magic leaves her weak and close to fainting, so she sits before she does. Chapter 5, their discussion continues over Daine's experiences with the revived animals, and Numair plainly says bringing the dead to life is unlike any wild magic he's ever heard of, but explicitly indicates it's a power the graveyard hag has. From Daine saying, "I'm no god, even if my Da is," it's not just a protest, it's a statement. Cosmically relevant, though they may not know it yet. They all agree Daine needs to keep her hands off dead things and to keep this new power as secret as possible. Numair is completely sure Ozorn would very much like to keep her if he knew. He gives Daine a spell to make her and the vulture invisible so she can take it back to her room. Before she leaves, she murmurs to Numair that he shouldn't have tried to hit him. Alanna knocks on Daine's door after she's back in her room and comes in to talk about what Daine said last to Numair. The conversation for this part of the restructure can expand to a little more honesty from Daine and a suggestion from Alanna's part that Numair made it plain to Ozorn Daine is his weakness, and if he pretends it's not true, he'll probably do something stupid again. The conversation ends on the note of, try to wait till we're back home for safety. Kadar arrives for Daine. Zek and Kitten go along with them, and the pair of Darkings remain in Daine's quarters, but clearly they hide before she leaves. The graveyard hag had suggested to Daine she should check out the temple district, and this is what Daine requests of Kadar. He tries to discourage this, but agrees, but before they get too far, he gets sidetracked when he sees armed soldiers on palace grounds where they are supposed to be forbidden. Daine notes his change of posture as he goes to get an explanation, and she looks around, sees the seemingly old enslaved woman sitting beside a fountain, feeding a bunch of rats, with her appearance changed again. Daine attempts to approach her, but the fountain, the woman, and the rats get farther and farther away and vanish away completely when Daine has to stop to catch her breath. Kadar catches up and tells her she's just gone a quarter mile and didn't respond to him calling for her to stop. She'd marched straight to the temple district like she had been here before. Their conversation, trying to figure out what Daine just did, is derailed by an abrupt shift to the fact of slavery, and Kadar steps away to calm himself, and in the process elects to just go forward as if nothing strange happened about Daine marching to the temple district without him. Kitten helps ease the tension. The main point from exploring the district is that all of the temples are neglected. This exploration can be expanded in the restructure to absorb any interesting or contributing details from the trek across the realms of the gods, such as Mahler or his swamp, conversations about the gods, greater, lesser, and animal, about the conditions of the realms, and the legends and lore suggesting the conflict between the greater gods and Usui of chaos. This may be the space to mention the idea of the first tree, something that would interest Kadar, as his magic works best through plants, and studying lore of the first tree gods might be an interest for him. Daine may spot a small chaos vent and start to get drawn in, as in Chapter 2 of Realms of the Gods, and Zek can bite her ear to free her of the trance. Kadar can't see it when Daine asks about it, but it adds to his strangely cross demeanor of the moment. Daine wonders if she can see it because of who she is, and he cannot because he's mortal. Zek can support this, that he doesn't see it either, but he bit her because he could tell something was wrong with her, staring and not moving and not answering his telepathic communication. The only temple in good condition is the one to the sun god Mithros, and behind it, the last temple that Kadar shows her is a smaller one to the graveyard hag, the patron goddess of Karthek, decorated with statues of rats and hyenas. Daine confirms what she clearly suspected by then. The older enslaved woman was the hag, but when she tries to tell Kadar this, she starts coughing and gagging. The hag won't let her speak her name. Kadar takes her outside and sends an enslaved boy to bring juice for Daine. At first, he's unwilling to speak freely about what's going on with the temples, gesturing to Daine about listening spells, but she tells him Kitten would know and there aren't any. Kadar becomes his most frank here in his appreciation for Kitten and tells Daine his uncle decided if people had time to worship the gods and offerings to make, they could make their offerings to Ozorn, who could affect their lives much more quickly than the gods seemed to. They conclude and agree that Ozorn is nuts. For this restructure, there aren't listening spells, but Kitten whistles, not a spell, but a gentle encouragement, and the darking twined at the back of Kadar's belt reveals itself shyly. Kadar is way more suspicious, but Daine hasn't made the connection to Ozorn quite yet. She just sees a shy, cute creature that no one seems to know much about, and invites this one to join the others in her quarters. If you are keeping track, the restructure of Wild Magic introduced 1 Darking, the restructure of Wolfspeaker introduced 2 Darkings, and now we have 3. The rest of the chapter is mostly more relaxed between Kadar and Daine. She lets him choose their next destination, which is to the training yards where they find some of his friends. Daine gets to show off her archery skill here, since there is nowhere else in the book that would fit for her to be shooting a bow. Chapter 6. When Kadar and Daine return to the palace, they cross paths with a few of the diplomats from some of the other delegations, and all of them witness a lightning strike out of a clear blue sky that melts 2 nearby statues of Ozorn. No one says anything, and everyone gets inside under cover. Returning to her room, the graveyard hag has taken care of the vulture that Daine revived and left a note for her. The 3 Darkings remain behind, unbeknownst to Daine. These 3 have gone dark to their creator and are forming their plan to find and effectively free their Darking kin from the purpose of their creation. Dinner that night is aboard an imperial boat that is magically sped up to travel north. Somewhere along the route, Daine notes that the northern army they passed a few days before seems to have pulled up stakes and gone elsewhere. Kadar keeps Daine company. He is unwilling to speak openly with Daine again. She reminds him Kitten would warn him of any spells. He tells her there are lip readers among his uncle's servants. This is finally Daine's connection point to the purpose of the Darkings, but this isn't the place to speak of that. Numair joining Kadar and Daine distracts her, and in the original, he proceeds to speak with a false cordiality to Kadar, while not very subtly warning him not to trifle with Daine, speaking as if for the entire delegation with regard to her well-being. Daine is upset enough to kick him under the table, but Numair tells her to stop that and doesn't let up on his deliberate intimidation factor toward Kadar. Kadar rolls with it better than you'd expect, maintaining a polite face without being openly afraid. For the restructure, Daine is older, so she's on the cusp of feeling betrayed that Numair thinks he needs to do something like this to protect her. But Kadar seems to understand where Numair is coming from with, "It makes sense if he loves you." Daine would deny that. She's been denying anything like it for years, but Kadar is essentially a complete outsider and effectively unbiased, as he hasn't been pursuing an interest toward Daine, which is part of what makes Numair's threat put him in so unfavorable a light. If Kadar thinks Numair might feel more toward Daine than she's believed, Daine starts to reconsider the possibilities. Daine has compassion for Kadar that Numair may have noted and misread, because she can see that Kadar is in an imperial cage. She doesn't like cages any more than the creatures inside of them do. To be fair, Numair also has a problem with cages, but his observations are clouded here. After an hour, the boat reaches the port where Daine greeted the animals when she arrived at Carthage, and out over the open water, it gradually becomes clear there is a forest of ships. Kadar becomes irritated at the waste of magical power used next to raise the Imperial boat up to a height in the air. In the original, he becomes even more angry to recognize the warships displayed below is both the Northern and the Western fleet. For the restructure, it will instead be the combined Western fleets, and part of his anger is why aren't the Northern fleet there? Is Ozorn crazy to leave the West unprotected from the Yamani Islands and the Copper Isles? Varys, of all unexpected people, pops up beside Kadar to admonish him to shut the fuck up. Did he want to disappear like Ozorn's last heir? Kitten puts her teeth on Kadar's leg, and Daine says, "You haven't been bit till you've been bit by a dragon." Shh. This is also a moment for Daine to properly realize Varys has priorities that she can respect, and she is navigating an imperial cage as well. At the end of the Emperor's display of magic and power, however, a rhythmic clanging sound starts ringing through the air. A very large statue has left its base in Carthage City, a horse and a man, identified by Varys as the first emperor of Carthage. He cries out a word twice in a language Daine doesn't know, says a full sentence, points his sword at the Imperial boat, then leaps out onto the ocean and gallops away north across the water. Kadar translates, "Woe, woe, woe to the Empire, we are forsaken, the gods are angry." That night, Daine dreams she's on a riverboat with the graveyard hag, and in the original, they are discussing some of the conditions of Carthage, why the graveyard hag has prepared Daine as a vessel for her power, that she may not even need to use Daine if Ozorn is willing to heed the warnings the gods have been sending. This dream can easily be expanded for the restructure to catch any additional divine information or detail necessary from Realms of the Gods, including potentially the presence of Ganel, with or without the graveyard hag's invitation. I think better without. She may be patron god of Carthage, but he commands the dream realms of mortals, and that's where they are right then. This is where the hag can share hers and Ganel's concerns regarding Usoe, and how the other greater gods are not listening to them with regard to this concern. This is where Daine can ask, why don't they eliminate Usoe altogether? And the answer is the gods may enslave, capture, or conquer each other, but they are forbidden to slay each other. For the greater gods, they do not perceive that Carthage or Ozorn is Usoe's access point, because she is forbidden to interfere directly in the affairs of mortals, and the gods do not believe any mortal would endanger their own existence by allying with her. They do not care about the Mage-made barrier or that it is gone. They care that Ozorn is preventing the general populace of Carthage from worshipping their gods, making the battle against chaos more treacherous. In the opening chapter of Realms of the Gods, there are abomination creatures called skinners, and they skin anything they touch. Shrubs, trees, animals, people, everything strips and shrivels in their proximity. In this restructure, the Skinners were Ozorn's first attempt at creating a life form he controlled. The Darkings are the second form. The hag does not quite have all this information, but she knows it's the Skinner creatures who added to the drought conditions in destroying cropland, because they are still roaming the region, contained by a magical barrier, but so far unkillable. The conversation with Alanna the next morning can be modified to reflect the higher tension as negotiations are not going well, and the stronger impending sense that this is not just a conflict over territory and fishing rights between two empires, but perhaps they are feeding into a larger cosmic struggle. Alanna has been through a divine crossroad of destiny before, and she's trying to determine if that's the track they're on now. They discuss the navy that they were shown yesterday and speculate on the position of the Northern Fleet now and the purpose behind bringing up the large Western fleets. Before joining Kadar for a tour of the university, Daine stops by Numer's room, which has the door open but a barrier over the doorway. Numer inside is reading and not responding to her. Daine leaves him be, taking Kitten and Zek and the one Darking who was initially in her quarters. As Kadar leads her through parts of the university and toward Lyndall Reed's study and workrooms, they admire Carthagi artistry and monuments to history, leading them through conversation that is tense and also revealing to each other about their values and interests. Lindahl welcomes them to his work area and moves a turtle to a back area where Daine thinks she glimpses the covered shape of a human body before he closes the door. Lindahl is plainly anxious when he shows Daine his area of glass tanks housing assorted plants and animals, including a pond, but Daine is happy to report that for captive animals, they are happy animals. The chapter ends with Kitten whistling with irritation at someone invisible in the workroom. Numair drops the spell and reveals himself. Chapter 7. Daine is confused and upset that she thought she saw Numair in his room, that it's not safe for him to be sneaking out of the palace where he is supposed to remain under the condition of his pardon. But she's also upset he didn't tell her he was sneaking out. The original has a terrible undertone of Daine not being mature enough to be involved in whatever information Numair, Lindahl, and Kadar need to exchange. Numair sort of invites her to join them if she wants, but states first that he knows she's not interested in secret things, and she validates this by leaving to hang out with the animals. In my opinion, this is a reflection of keeping the story focused for a younger audience. Daine is still being referred to as a girl, while even Kadar is lumped into the adults in some narrative sections. It was enough to let young readers know something was happening in the background between the three mages. Daine is about the animals, and that's how this book was originally kept. For the restructure, I suppose I would maintain the overall result, but there is the Darkings to deal with. Numair explains that he needed to meet with Lindahl and Kadar like this, where there was no chance of being found out. He's brought along the Darking from his room, which returned to him at some point, and Daine brings out the one that came with her and Zek. Lindahl has never seen them, is sweet and fascinated, and the one that had initially belonged with Kadar had found its way back to him and reveals itself once more, startling the prince unhappily. Lindahl realizes that Darkings must be what's setting off his wards some of the time. He remains confident that none had actually gotten into his rooms before these three were brought, and the Darkings grouped together to communicate their agreement. He theorizes, and they confirm, their origin is Ozorn. They can merge together to show a reflection of the occasion that created them, similar to how they do in Realms of the Gods. The humans observe a cave none of them can identify the rock walls of. Ozorn is alone and naked except for the black glass pendant that Daine saw before when Kitten whistled it visible. Kitten's whistle now tells Daine that she recognizes it too, but it looks like a different twist than when they first saw it. Focusing on it too hard creates a nauseous, uneasy feeling. The Darkings have reached a point of communication to say that Kadar's magics still mostly protected him from the Darking that was attached to him. It would not have been able to strangle him or anything like that, even if directed to. In the original version of Book 3, we find out in the epilogue that Lindahl Reed had primarily remained in Carthag all these years to help facilitate enslaved people escaping. As a demonstration of trust for Daine, and how lucky he was his magical wards were sufficient to keep the Darkings out, even not specifically keyed to them, it can be quietly made clear he's been helping enslaved people, and such a thing being discovered almost certainly would have led to imprisonment, torture, and death for Lindahl and anyone connected to him, not accepting Kadar. Here, Kadar shares about the type of information Ozorn and Chioke, his chief mage, have had lately that Kadar could not figure out how they possibly knew, things about internal affairs as well as international. The scene would be characterized by an abundance of dialogue between the three men, energetic interest in the information between them and the Darkings, and some small contributions from Daine, but Daine is quietly stewing up to the same conclusion as the original scene. "You could have trusted me," she says to Numair. Originally, Numair is effectively dismissive because he meant no harm, insists he does trust her, and he made his choices for her benefit as well. I would rather just let him accept responsibility for disappointing her. He's allowed to say he does trust her, and he can say he won't keep something like this secret again. Daine can't ignore that she's still hurt, but she can let the simmering anger go. If you recall from when we were talking about Wolfspeaker, Numair lightly threatened to put Daine in a dungeon and then to drop her into a glacial crevice if she didn't keep herself safe. With some mild irritation and a surprising undercurrent of flirtation, Daine can threaten if he lies to her like that again, she will find something worse than a glacier to drop him off of. Numair's reaction, somewhere between entertained and poleaxed, Kadar and Lindahl find something else to be interested in for a minute. Daine and Numair could spend the rest of their romantic lives delivering more and more ridiculous such threats to each other as a piece of their love language. Daine still leaves instead of getting involved in whatever the mages came to discuss in the first place. Lintal lets her into another aviary, this one designed to accommodate birds of northern climates. One area of the aviary includes skeletons of various animals and birds and some fossils still in stone beds. One of these is the equivalent of an Archaeopteryx. Daine thinks surely a fossil still in the stone cannot reanimate and touches it, and discovers she was wrong. Yes, it can. The magic leaves her very weakened again, and she just watches the fossilized dino bird pull itself out of the rock, stretch out its bones as if missing ones were in place, and looks around, seemingly fully alert. Lindal, Numair, and Kadar, for whatever reason, have come to check on her. Lindal is elated to find the fossil animated, not initially knowing it wasn't intentional, and explains the theorized place of this fossil between dinosaurs and birds. The fossil flies around them, showing off that it can do so. Under Numair's advice, Daine shares with Kadar and Lindal most of what has happened to give her this strange power and what has happened since. Lindal remarks that Daine should try this in the Hall of Bones, and almost immediately adds that dinosaurs walking around would probably be inconvenient. Kadar dryly agrees with this barely veiled foreshadowing, and also agrees Daine should keep it secret. Like Numair, he knows his uncle would want this power. Lindal names the Archaeopteryx Bone Dancer for as long as he's with them, which ends up being at least through Protector of the Small. The mages discuss where the power could have come from, academics comparing who has the power to raise the dead, and the instant Daine thinks of mentioning the graveyard hag, she stifles Daine's throat again, causing another coughing fit. Numair leaves soon after, and Daine gets to properly enjoy a tour of the animals with Lindal and Kadar. This sequence and conversation can absorb a ton of anything that's needed from Realms of the Gods, all three men being well-read and interested in a variety of random topics. Even the first bridge could find a way to get mentioned. If you want it to be funny, they could argue the first rope bridge or the first rope and wood bridge. The evening banquet that night is much more tense than the previous occasions. Negotiations are not going well. Daine is seated by Kadar again and spends some of the time with her ears shapeshifted under her curls so she can hear pieces of conversations and arguments. Adding in for the restructure a little bit between Chioke and Ozorn about spies going dark, which Daine may or may not connect to meaning the Darkings, and them not returning or reporting as expected. None of the three Darkings are with her, but she has figured out or begun to suspect about their mission to find and free their fellows. Conversation with Kadar reaches the point that Daine impulsively urges him to leave Carthak with the Tortalan delegation, but on top of anything else in his responsibilities, he would be leaving everything he loves to Ozorn's vengeance. Mother, friends, pets. The crowning moment of the night is supposed to be an intricate dessert that Varys crafted and displays. Even Daine can't deny its beautiful work. But then it starts to collapse and rats start to pour out of the dessert. Daine stops them from getting far, and in their mind she can see the portal the graveyard hag has made for them and directing them toward. This is perhaps the only time in the entire series that Daine uses her wild magic to physically force animals to do anything, pushing them all back through the cake, empowered by her anger on Varys' behalf for her destroyed work. To be noted, in the restructure, the graveyard hag has most definitely added fuel to the side of chaos in the cosmic struggle. Varys has fainted in distress, but Numair passes everything else to get to Daine, cupping her face in the original. Keep that. An ad for Daine, a dawning realization that Kadar might have been right the other night. Numair is the first to notice that Ozorn has disappeared. He gets caught up in helping Varys after that, and Kadar and Daine drift away from the lingering chaos and distress. At Daine's request, Kadar checks with Alana and takes her to visit the animals in the menagerie. He didn't expect her to ask to go down into the enclosures, but she persuades him to allow it, leaving Zek with him. Zek asks about the keys, and Daine explains they're for opening doors and cages, and he asks through Daine to hold Kadar's keys so he can look at them. As Daine goes through the enclosures, she offers to essentially implant a waking dream in each of the animals. So if they wish, they can go to that place in their mind which recreates the freedom most of them knew previously, and the ones who hadn't still craved it in their bones. Reaching the hyenas, Kedar tries and fails again to dissuade Daine. The hyenas quickly tell Daine she just missed seeing who they call the Hungry One, the one who wants to eat the world, and Daine is surprised to identify their scent memory as Ozorn. She asks Kedar why Ozorn is afraid of the hyenas. They can smell his fear into their enclosure. Kedar explains there was a prophecy when Ozorn took the throne that hyenas would lead his doom to him. Before Daine plants the dream for the hyenas, they all hear voices from the Immortals enclosure, and Kedar is alarmed because a lot of harm can come from pieces of Immortals used in malicious spells and potions. The hyenas aren't worried about the dream, so Daine goes with him. He doesn't have the keys he needs for the enclosure. Luckily, Kitten goes most everywhere that Daine goes and whistles the lock open. Zek returns to Daine's shoulder as they go into the Immortals enclosure. Chapter 8, and Daine has her first conversation with Barja, learning of the magic that has made her face known to all Stormwings. The Benjiku and other enslaved people are the ones they heard, none of them there to harm or steal anything, but providing what they can for the imprisoned Immortals. When Hebach calls Daine a mortal, the old Benjiku man from before objects. His name is Tano, and he is adamant that Daine is at least partly divine, and wasn't it given to his people to know these things, given by the goddess who birthed them. Among the things he claims is they were bound by the same goddess to be slaves. Daine doesn't think too well of that last part. Barja scoffs, but Hebach is willing to listen to the Benjiku, and he wants to know why Daine told Rikosh they were there. She doesn't get to answer before the caged griffin starts screaming, and Kedar knows the guards will come to quiet it. They all need to leave. This conversation can be restructured as needed to absorb a small amount of info from Realms of the Gods before the griffin goes off. Tano leads them down through tunnels, and it's relevant that they are magically shielded such that the Darkings have not identified they even exist. When Kedar asks why they were in the Immortals enclosure, Tano bluntly explains they were offering worship to the captured Immortals, because he knows they will be free one day and better to remind them not all people are jailers. When Kedar tries to insist they are not gods to worship, Tano points out his uncle wants worship like a god, who will be judged false when they face the Black God. When Tano shows them the ladder up to the surface where the tunnels will lead them into a garden near the guest quarters, Daine kisses his cheek in the original. For the restructure, she also thinks in that moment she wished Lushagui, the goddess Tano claims birthed the Banjiku, had not bid them to be enslaved. She might even be aware that Tano might consider such a kiss on the cheek as the favor of a demigoddess as he sees her. Before leaving her for the night, Kedar points out the stars to Daine and tells her they shouldn't be visible. This is the rainy season, but there hasn't been rain in too long. Daine dreams of the graveyard hag again. This time, they are at a crossroads. The hag wants her to go to a human graveyard where the bones are sticking up from the earth, and Daine wants to go a different path toward dinosaur skeletons buried the other way. Kitten is with them. As a dragon, she has the power to go where she pleases, but the hag uses magic to quiet her, pissing Daine off all over again. She is tired of being pushed around by the hag and forces her way toward the dinosaur skeletons, a difficult step to manage, but easier as she persists and pushes. She grips her badger claw pendant, and the tip of it biting into her hand seems to help break whatever is keeping her from advancing. But then she comes fully awake in the Hall of Bones, as if she sleepwalked there. Irritated at the hag's manipulation, Daine stumbles into the nest of dinosaur eggs, and in a flash of the resurrecting power, all the eggs are brought to life, and Daine dies, because the power came directly from her life force. Following this is one of the biggest changes to this restructure. Originally, Daine finds herself feeling good, but walking up a path in an unfamiliar but very enjoyable woods. She finds her way to a thatched cottage that she remembers from a dream in the last book. Her father, Weirin, is arguing with the badger about involving Daine in Carthag's affairs and the power foisted on her through the badger. Sarah comes outside and sees Daine, drawing Weirin's attention to her, and he blames the badger again. The badger doesn't accept blame, but does take Daine back to the mortal realm and her body. There was no exchange between Sarah and Daine, no big reaction from Sarah to seeing Daine's deceased spirit coming home to her, and there are more dialogue lines from Weirin than previously. The badger finally confirms that that is Daine's father, as if he didn't spend the first 2 books of the series originally actively avoiding answering questions about her father, and he scolds her now for not believing the Banjiku about her parentage. This time for the restructure, Daine meets the duck mole god, a platypus. on the foggy path that she experienced in the first book when she stopped her heart and died. He's just a friend to Wiryn and the Badger God, making sure she makes it safely along the path to her mother's. This sequence is to expand and absorb some of the realms of the gods exchange that takes place in the cottage. Neither Sarah or Daine want Daine to go back, but Wiryn and the Badger are quick to snap to agreement with each other that she must. Sarah may try to insist something like, "We can change things to suit ourselves," to which Wiryn gruffly replies, "Sometimes." It is not supposed to be Daine's time to die yet, but Sarah can rightly point out it's the second time Daine has died anyway, even though they are saying that. This argument won't go as long as the restructured dream of book 2 went, but it will encompass the fact that because Daine has died this second time, and right now her body is going cold and unattended except for Kitten, this is a decision point being forced to her now. She can live as a lesser goddess in her father's domain, forever reunited with her mother, and Kitten, as a dragon, would still be able to visit, but never able to interact with her mortal friends and found family. Or her other choice, whether the Badger takes her back or she chooses to stay dead now and not accept being a goddess, she will go to the realms of the dead, where her grandfather is, and where, when it's their time, Numair and everyone else would cross over to. It isn't fair, but it's a condition of the circumstance. If Daine touches Sarah, that will be a deciding action. It wouldn't be like this if the hag had not interfered, if the Badger had explained the cost and the danger to Daine's life force. Critically, somehow, Daine and Wiryn reach agreement and understanding here. The rest of the conversation that Daine and the Badger God would have had on his restoring her spirit to her body can be had before she returns. There waiting is Numair and Alana and the young enslaved woman assigned to Daine's quarters. The young woman ultimately realized Daine's door was open, Daine was missing, and rather than report to her enslavers, she goes to the lady chaperone of Daine, Alana, and Alana goes to Numair, whom she did not know had a focus for Daine. If the situation were not so dire, she would definitely be professionally teasing him about that. But for Numair, here come all of the emotions that he's suppressed since the seeds began in Dunlath, and the only thing stopping him from kissing Daine as he holds her is Alana being right there. All Daine needs to tell them is something like, "I don't think I'll be seeing Ma again," and break down crying. The scene doesn't need more to get her back to her room, where Zek and her Darking are still snoozed together. The last thing that the Badger God told her in the original, so this would have to be the last thing before he restores her to life, is that Le Chagui never meant for the Banjiku to be enslaved, and Daine should tell them that. The next morning, Daine is feeling a little physically worn by last night's death adventure, but there is an energizing change inside. In the original, she reaches out magically to the Emperor's aviary to check on his birds and senses that some of them are fallen sick again. Part of what makes her so eager and willing to walk off alone this morning in the restructure is the different acceptance about herself and her power, her parentage, and her choices. And also the romance she feels much more possible after the way Numair held and looked at her the night before. He'd thought he'd lost her, and it showed. She's also determined to properly diagnose the Emperor's birds this time, not for him, but for their sake. When she reaches the aviary, despite the very early hour, Ozorn is there and invites her to join him for breakfast. Daine asks to see the birds first without telling him any are sick, and he lets her go with the expectation that she will join him after. Once she heals the newly sick birds, she asks them enough questions and gets them to show her their nests, where she discovers they have pecked through a clear protective lacquer on decorative vines across the glass wall of the aviary. Underneath, the green enamel tastes salty to the birds, and they take the lead in from the paint which was making them sick. I have always loved how stupid and how simple the solution ended up being, and Daine is delighted to have solved the problem. The Emperor is also glad to have the answer and still insists that she join him despite her clothes yet again being soiled with bird dung. Ozorn invites her to drink a toast with him, and before long it's clear that Daine has been drugged. He answers her seemingly with honesty about what he plans to do to keep her and reward her for serving him, the excuses to send the Tortalan delegation home, and his confidence that Numair will return to rescue her. For the restructure, he can let her know that the Northern Fleet set out after the Tortalans landed. He never intended to make peace if peace didn't mean handing over everything without a fuss. Daine succumbs to the drug, her last word, Numair's name, and Ozorn's last line is a promise that Numair will die as a blood sacrifice. Before I go any further, if you are this far into this video, you're amazing. This is a labor of love, and it has taken so much more time to draft, to outline, to record than I thought that it would. I have spent the last couple of hours talking, and I needed to take a little break there. So you also make sure you move around and get some water. Take breaks when you need to. We made it this far. We've got just a couple more chapters to go. Just know that if you're watching this, statistically, or according to my YouTube analytics, you're 1 in 100. Out of about 100 people that this video has been shown to, only one person at a time tends to actually click on my videos. So that's you. Thank you. Now, chapter 9. Daine loses her temper, possibly my favorite single chapter out of any of Tamara Pierce's books. This chapter opens with Daine having what she later learns are true dreams. First, she sees Zek escape from Ozorn when he is in Daine's room ordering people to clear it out. She dreams of Ozorn spelling Kitten into a sleep and putting her in one of the cages in the menagerie still under the sleep spell. Then she's inside the cabin that the book started with, packed with the Tortalan delegations minus Daine, discussing some of the situation. It needs to be clear that the reason the Tortalan delegation is permitted to leave is Daine is accused of behaving as a rogue actor, and all of the delegations are supposed to be under sacred protection. So they get to leave along with all of the others, even if it's only to go right into the arms of war and destruction at home. Lyndall Reed is there. He has Bone Dancer and one of the Darkings. Numair has the other Darking, and it may be trying to soothe him in some useless way. Numair leaves it to Alana to explain the Darkings to the others. The Darking tells Numair it can help him when he declares that he wants to return for Daine. Daine wakes up and is in a windowless, doorless white room with very little food or water. It's a cage that she is sure is intended to suppress the magical gift, but it is not spelled to suppress wild magic. The first thing that happens is all the animals within the range of her power turn on the nearest human, receiving her demigoddess rage at being locked in a box with no air and stale food. Then Daine receives the pain of some of them being immediately killed, and she withdraws, urging the rest to go hide. Before Daine can despair for too long, in rides Zek on one of the Banjiku's trained cheetahs, proudly showing her the keys that he stole to rescue her. Zek and the cheetah lead Daine into the tunnels where Tano is waiting and able to answer some of her questions about what's happened and how many days she was locked away. He expects her to leave. She answers she needs to talk to Kadar and says she has 1 or 2 things to do first, including recover her dragon. Before too long, she relays the Badger's message from Lushagui to the Banjiku that they are not meant to be slaves. Tano does not argue, but says they will have to discuss this later after they have gotten Daine to safety. He brings Kadar secretly to the tunnel, and Kadar is alarmed. His immediate focus is getting Daine out of Karthak. Her rage starts to break through, but when she starts to tell Kadar she needs to get to the university because she thinks Numair may be hiding there, she stops because she can see on Kadar's face something is wrong. He tells her Numair was already caught and executed while she was still imprisoned, and Ozorn exploded the 2 Darkings when Numair was captured, a loss unforeseen. She denies it at first, that it must have been a simulacra. Kadar insists it was real. His uncle made him and everyone at the university watch. Coolness trickled into her mind until her skull was filled with it. Her world seemed extra sharp and extra real. Part of her, someplace deep inside, wailed. That seemed unreal, as if she were watching a crying baby from a great distance. Kadar was shaking her. "Daine, can you hear me?" She gently pushed his hands away. "Stop that, I'm thinking." His eyes and Tano's held the same worried, frightened look. "You weren't answering. You looked frozen." She put a finger to her lips, and he shut up. A thought was coming in the distance. She waited, patiently, skin rippling in brief shivers until it reached her. Ozorn had to pay. The gods had taken too long to say whatever it was they'd planned to say here. With all those omens and portents they had sent, the sole effect had been her kidnapping and her friend's execution. Plainly, she would have to take care of this herself. If any gods tried to stop her, they would regret it. "What time of day is it?" Her voice sounded distant but reasonable. Something about her, though, must not be right. She saw that Chirp backed away to press against Tano's legs, fur on end. Both men began to sweat. So that is the impression that Daine is making at this point. Settling on retribution against Ozorn and Karthak for killing Numair, she tells Tano to pass the word among the enslaved people and Banjiku that they all need to be ready to leave the palace by dusk, and for Kadar to also warn any people he cares about to get clear of the palace. In the original version, the epilogue of Book 3 includes a conversation between Kadar and Daine about freeing slaves. Kadar arguing why the economy in the country wouldn't be able to do it, and Daine insisting he at least try, starting with the Banjiku and the Emperor's mutes. This conversation can happen here, but with a much less forgiving tone from Daine to Kadar, where it's more like, you will free them, and you will figure out how to make it work, or else I'll take care of it after I've taken care of your uncle. She asks Tano to also take the Emperor's birds from the aviary to keep them safe, and he willingly agrees, calling her Great One, and takes Kadar away with him. She asks Zek if he wants to stay behind. Things might get scary where she's going, and he answers, scary with you is better than scary without you. Originally, she verbalizes the pain of not getting to say goodbye. A restructure can include just a few lines of the added pain of having realized the romantic love, mutual even, but not getting to enjoy it for any time together. While Kadar and Tano are away, Daine settles into her magic and reaches out to all the animals near the Emperor's army and aboard the Navy vessels. In the first book, she learned how to use animals in guerrilla tactics, and in the second book did so a little more. And now for the third time, she's asking the animals to help her destroy food, destroy ropes, damage storage containers, spoil water, cause fusses, and keep people awake through the night and running through the day. Birds pooping and diving, dogs and cats howling, all small annoyances that mass together to stop a force from moving anywhere. As Daine says, if the gods weren't prepared to teach Ozorn manners, she would have to. After nightfall, Daine makes her way to the Hall of Bones. She resurrects the Triceratops first. It takes a lot out of her without killing her, and the graveyard hag appears then to assure her if she continues like that, she will die again. She answers Daine's angry questions finally about why she didn't act sooner and why she needed Daine, what she needed Daine to do, but Daine is no more interested in doing what the hag wants than she's ever been. Luckily, the hag is willing to go with her plan since she's carrying it through, and advises her to make a deal with the rats in exchange for enough life force energy to raise all the dinosaurs she wants without killing herself or the rats. This conversation can also absorb any other chaos or divine detail the restructure may have left or require. She may even realize Uusue is so much closer than any of them knew. At this point, the hag's best bet is to help Daine destroy the palace, as she intends to do anyway. While they wait for the rats, the Darking that had been Kadar's finds her, sought her when it saw the animal rumblings earlier. It's afraid. All the Darkings are afraid. Ozorn and Chioke have been summoning and exploding them all. Terminating a failed tool and resisting the summons is agonizing. Daine tells them, gather their kin, leave and hide, go to Kadar, and the Banjiku who would be kind to them. She was going to take care of Ozorn soon. Zek advises Daine that rats always want food, and so she works out a deal where they will be able to raid human pantries without the animal rat catchers helping humans to stop them. Daine raises dozens of dinosaurs and 8 mammoths, explains to them why she brought them to life, how she wants the palace left in ruins, tells them that they killed her friend and she wants revenge. Will they help her? They agree with a silent roar that she can feel as a vibration. You will have to read the book to enjoy the systematic destruction of the imperial seat of power. Partway through, Daine finds Varys, and her rage stirs at first, but Zek points out she's been crying. She isn't wearing any of her pretty clothes, her face paint, or her perfumes, and her hair is unwashed and uncared for. Her grief over Numair is deep and real. The Emperor made her watch as well. As Varys explains herself a little, Daine is stunned to be reminded of her ma, who liked the same kinds of things Varys is expressing then, and tells her, just leave. Chapter 10. Daine ultimately finds Ozorn's rooms. Chioke is there and is killed, but takes out half of the dinosaur that crushed him. When Daine touches the skeletons as they're deteriorating and losing their reanimation, she is given a wild magic vision of what they looked like, or what Tamara Pierce imagined their hides and scales looked like, and the afterlife environment they were returning to. She breaks through to the aviary, and there's evidence that this is where Ozorn was, and he has fled the palace. As Daine's frustration builds, the hyenas arrive, telling her the hag herself directed the hyenas to find Daine here. Rikosh lands overhead shortly after to first tell Daine some of the dinosaurs have broken open the mortal menagerie enclosures. While the hyenas get a good sniff of Ozorn's personal scent from his quarters, Daine asks Rikosh why he was there now. He answers he was paying his respects to his true sovereign, Queen Barja, but also the hag may have mentioned this would be an interesting night. She tells him that Numair was killed. He already knows, and he simply says that he's sorry, which is all she needed to hear. She asks Rikosh to look after Zek, and he says he will take him to Kitten's cage, which the marmoset is happy to do. As a callback to Book 2 and Flicker, Rikosh cautions Zek to mind the sharp feathers. Daine shapeshifts into hyena form and they hunt down Ozorn. When they find him at the griffin enclosure, likely to fly away, he is wearing an illusion to look like Kadar that he drops in terror at the sight of the hyenas. Unlike when Daine hunted down Yolaine with the wolves, she is absolutely after blood this time, and unlike Brokefang keeping her and the rest of the pack in check, the hyenas are just as eager to get Ozorn too. He has a magical barrier to keep them back, but he's been fighting dinosaurs to get this far, and a hyper white light starts mixing with his green colored magic, indicating his life force is pouring into the barrier too. Just before the hyenas can break through the barrier with force, a human voice shouts no, and a new barrier wraps a protective bubble around Ozorn. Daine doesn't look around at the humans that have come to interfere, but Kadar speaks, telling Ozorn he's lost, he needs to surrender and abdicate, or the hyenas will get him. Ozorn refuses, proud to the very end. Barja encourages them to let the hyenas have what they hunted for. Her words remind him, though, of the steel feather, and he seems to have carried it twined in one of his braids, drawing it out now. He stabs his arm as Daine lunges to try and stop him. Power explodes and takes out the barrier, and Daine falls onto steel feathers that cut. As promised, Ozorn has been transformed into a Stormwing, and all the magic attached to his mortal gift, including the cages around all of the Immortals, vanish. For this restructure, the only thing he has left after transforming is the twisted black glass pendant, which Daine may note is like her badger claw token being the only thing that stays with her during shapeshifts. Hebach can identify how dangerously like a glass-enclosed chaos vent the necklace looks like, and it could even be in a different twisted form than the instant Daine saw it when Kitten whistled it visible and seen in the Darking's reflected origin image. Barja would get a good laugh at the arrogant, foolish mortal emperor who, it's clear to her, thought he could make a deal with the Chaos Queen to rule the world, like she wouldn't eat him just as fast as she would eat any anthill. For the men behind Daine, Barja's words cue them in to the fact that all of what is happening is part of the greater cosmic struggle. They are standing at a crossroads destiny a la the end of Lioness Rampant. Barja also declares the humans are to leave Ozorn to her. Now he would face Stormwing justice as a Stormwing. Ozorn actually argues, no, he is the Emperor Mage. Hebach reminds him an immortal is forbidden from holding a mortal throne. Rikosh had arrived before Ozorn transformed to witness the trap laid with his feather. He reminds Ozorn now he can no longer use human magic and to try. Kadar's Darking had gone over to Kitten and Zek when the cage vanished from around them, and the spell Ozorn tries is to explode the Darking, which does not work, and sends him tumbling end over head. Barja declares she must deal with Jokun first, and then she will be back for Ozorn, leaving with Hebach in her wake. In the original, the reader never sees Barja fight Jokun, but at the end of Realms of the Gods, there is a detailed battle between Barja and another Stormwing Queen allied to Stormwing Ozorn. I don't think that battle is necessary, but it could fit here with Jokun, Ozorn's ally, being closer on hand for her to catch and battle in the sky while civilians below also watch. In the original, Rikosh teases Ozorn some more as Ozorn attempts to use bolts of Stormwing magic and strikes the ground instead, and then Ozorn takes off, Rikosh following to keep track of him, but with a parting remark to Daine to look behind her. For the restructure, Rikosh lingers here. There is expanded conversation because his time as a friend to Daine is the greatest thing lost from cutting up the Realms of the Gods into a trilogy like this. He tells Daine to turn around and remains also to find out how Numair is alive. The conversation that follows between Daine and Numair would have to be altered to reflect the changed nature of their relationship up to this point. Daine sees Numair and is so shocked she transforms back into her human form, and the hyenas briefly conceal her with their bodies. Numair sends his cloak to float over to her to cover her up. She denies it's him. Sure, it must be a simulacra to torture her, since Kadar and Varys were so convinced it was him, and she knows Numair could add magic to his simulacra. Originally, to prove himself, he reminds her he transformed Tristan Staghorn into a tree in Dunlath. For this version, he could, a little jokingly, a little worried, tell her she might have to find something worse than a glacier to drop him off of, since he's done exactly what he told her he wouldn't do, although it wasn't at all his intention to put her through anything like this. The simulacra was supposed to be a backup just in case, but he didn't want to bring it to her attention that he was at risk of being captured, and in trying to spare her worry, brought on this greater consequence. Daine wants to believe him, but can't bring herself to touch him until Kitten confirms that it's actually Numair. He can cup her face, less hesitation than ever before. They don't need to kiss in this moment. There's a feeling of surety that it's going to happen for them. The look on his face says he realizes it too. But neither of them actually lean. There's still a smell of blood and fire to the moment. There's still Kadar and Lindal right nearby. Rikash too, Ozorn flying away in the backdrop, clumsy but steadily gaining some distance. Rikash is here, more than willing to lighten the saccharine moment, something rude and friendly, possibly the long Lankin joke about Numair that gets the retort from Daine about take a swallow or two of oil to wash the sand in his crop out the end that does the thinking for him. To this, he laughs, and they watch as he flies away to catch up to Ozorn. And for the restructure, they are watching the unexpected whiplash of horror as Ozorn turns in the air and kills Rikash with a successfully directed bolt this time. Chapter 11 does not exist for this book or any book in the original Immortals series, but to cram in the last bits of the Realms of the Gods and one more action sequence, Chapter 11 exists for this restructure. Daine had come to terms with the loss of Ma, and she knows she will lose all her mortal loved ones eventually, including Anua, Numair, and Cloud. Kitten is immortal, won't leave her, and she's just realized Rikash was another immortal who was also a friend she could laugh with. Daine transforms into a raptor bird and takes off before she can think, before anyone can catch her. Their use of the rats spared her any true energy drain. She has more than enough power left to chase Ozorn down in a fast flight. His only advantage is he knows the coastal region better than her, but he's newer to flying. This version, he has no extra allies as decoy or distraction. He can only fling magic back at her that she contends with or dodges. The way she kills him in the original is exactly how she can take him out here. It's just on Carthag's north coast instead of Tortal's west coast. The black glass pendant is given some last comparison to the ember token Alana wears, and then Daine breaks it. The Queen of Chaos emerges, enraged to lose her vessel, and seizes Daine. The great gods intervene. There's no mistaking Usoe manifesting in the mortal realms. Daine witnesses Usoe's brief trial before Mother Flame and Father Universe. Daine's brief trial in the face of the gods can absorb any remaining detail necessary, including a brief argument whether she should be restored to the option of choosing godhood, since she's just wielded as much power as a god in the destroying of the palace and long-term impact she's had and going to leave. But she knows she's intended to live a mortal life from here. Her only reason to be a goddess would be to see her Ma. There's the great holidays for future chances to cross over, like the Equinox dream visit in Book 2. Wirren and Sarah support Daine's choice to live as a mortal, arguing against any gods who think Daine and her destructive potential need to be reined in. As Ganel points out, Daine is just an agent of change, and that is not evil. Before Daine goes back, Sarah shows her her full goddess form as the Green Lady. The Graveyard Hag supplies the power, and the Badger supplies the precision in returning Daine to Numair, Lindal, and Kadar. They remained in the area of the Immortals menagerie for 1, to help manage the remaining immortals, and 2, the Badger had popped in to tell Numair and Kadar to stay put, says nothing to Lindal but gives him a respectful nod and vanishes as abruptly. They saw the kaleidoscope swirling smoke of a chaos vent go up at a distance up the coast, but with the Badger's warning had to trust in Daine. Any remaining questions can be answered between the two gods and the mortal mages, and Kadar takes the opportunity to plead for the hag's mercy over the rest of Carthag. Most of the people are not like his uncle. With Daine's blessing, the hag agrees and asks her sibling gods what they think. Their answer comes in the form of a rainy wind and a roll of thunder as seasonal rains are finally ushered in. For anyone curious, the hag can add that the Skinner destroying the croplands also collapsed when Ozorn transformed. Why didn't the Darkings become unmade? Because when Ozorn made them, he had physically crossed through a portal to do it in the divine realms, which imbued them with an inalienable potential for self-actualization and free will. The last word from the hag to Numair is that Daine will sleep for 3 days after all the power she's had moving through and been moved through. In the original, Daine was comfortable enough to smile without speaking at this point. Numair was alive, things were going to be okay. In this restructure, she's much closer to numb and shock, as the unexpected grief of losing Rikash barely realized as the friend that he was, along with the fresh grief of losing her mother in a new way, along with the emotional roller coaster of Numair being dead and then actually being alive, the slight sense of betrayal, the stronger hope of a future romance. She is more wrecked than content this version. Numair can quietly promise that she just needs to rest, and then they will go home to Anua, Cloud, and Tahoe. The last word she hears is the comforting promise that the animal gods will ensure all of the menagerie animals safely make it to their proper homes. It's the least they could do. And we have for this a whole new epilogue. This epilogue will have a little more of the optimism that Rikash's death took out of the final chapter. Jumping to next spring's equinox, Sarah's time of power in the year, and Daine, Numair, and Kitten have special permission to cross to Sarah and Weirin's domain. This planned occasion includes Kitten's grandparents, Diamond Flame and Wingstar, landing in a graceful spiral to visit their granddaughter for the first time at this place where her keeper can most easily also meet them. The original Book 3 epilogue began with a conversation between Daine and Alanna, where Alanna understands Daine more than most could about being a direct tool for the gods' desired outcomes, and reassuring Daine that despite her worries, whatever stories about Daine make it north, people won't really believe it's all real, and that's the good thing about fantastic things happening far away from home. For this version, Daine can either internally reflect to the relevant pieces of this conversation, such as if Alanna turned out to be right, or have a small bit of this same exchange between her and Sarah, but framed as after the return home rather than worry about what the return home would look like. Anything else that is necessarily important, such as Kedar having trouble with nobles who didn't like the emancipation movement, or the total cost of the destruction Daine's dinosaurs carried out, this can fit in brief conversational mentions. Weirin can even be rudely dismissive, as he was in Realms of the Gods, about conflicts that only involve mortals and their interests. He can make up for the rudeness by giving Daine a bow, one of the things that he gives to mortals as a sign of his favor. What does need to be discussed is how the collapsing of Ozorn's magic that bound the Immortals who were headed to attack Tortall freed them, and they turned on the humans who tried to recapture them. When the North Fleet received confirmation that Kedar was the new emperor and calling them back, Chorus and Port Cain are the last point of attack in this conflict initiated by Ozorn. The so-called Immortals War is named and concluded. Barja can show up to confirm, after all, that she did get her crown and her Stormwing nation back, and that they will never be Tortall's allies, but also no Stormwings will be allies to any of the other mortal nations going forward. Essentially, she can promise that. For her part in helping set Barja and Hebak free, they still owe Daine a life debt in this version, as they were not the ones either to bring Ozorn to justice when they said they would be. There is grief lingering over Rikash that dully surprises Daine some, connected to him being fun and eye-opening overall, but Daine has learned that grief and loss are things she can't protect herself from in life. What she can do is take Numair's hand and hold on to the wonderful things that she does have, protect them as hard as she can, and love them as long as she's alive. They can kiss, finally, but this one is not their first. And again, you are absolutely amazing to make it here to the end of this video. I have no intention of doing anything like this, restructuring to any of Tamara Pierce's other work, but I have many other videos in mind to discuss different points across her several series and the 2 fantasy worlds that she has constructed. I deeply thank you for the time you have given me to watch this, and I hope to catch you in the next video.